Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome everyone to ACYPL's first Town Hall of 2022 on policy and infrastructure around electric vehicles. My name is Stacie Fujii, and I will be your moderator. I have been a part of the organization since 2005 and have traveled to Egypt, Jordan, Thailand, Timor-Leste, and most recently, China. I'm also on the board of trustees and welcome all of you today. As EV has surged in popularity, almost 9% of the cars bought worldwide are electric vehicles as of 2021. So too have questions about charging infrastructure and environmental impact grown. The US has lagged behind Europe in good charging infrastructure, and just recently, the Biden administration put out a call for states to bid on a $5 billion contract by this summer to jumpstart an effort at building 500,000 EV chargers along American highways. And with automakers like GM pledging electrification of its fleet by 2025 and securing commercial EV orders from companies like FedEx and Walmart and Lucid Motors, one of the new kids on the block, whose Model Air has gone farthest on a charge, as well as produced the fastest charging battery on the market. It is beyond clear that EVs are a large part of our collective automotive and manufacturing future. With that in mind, I am thrilled to introduce today's panelists. We have Jessica Nigro, Matt Nelson, and Omar Vargas. Jessica is with Lucid Motors. She is the head of global public policy. Omar is the vice president and head of global public policy for GM. And Matthew is the director of government affairs for Electrify America, LLC. So with that, we'll jump right in. And I would like for each of you to tell me a little bit about yourself and the company that you represent. We'll open up the floor with Omar.
Oh, thank you, Stacie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I really do appreciate ACYPL's invitation. I love the organization, happy to support it in any way possible, including participating in important policy conversations like this one. I have the pleasure and the honor of leading a group of 100 public policy professionals around the world that are working to bring life to General Motors' vision of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And we're going to do that with auto electrification, ensuring that the road and the passengers are connected to the environment around them, and with autonomous vehicle technology. So looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Omar. Jess.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining today. I love this topic. My name is Jess Nigro, and I came on board at Lucid last summer in 2021 after about 14 years in the auto industry, both in Washington and in Europe. So I love talking about the policies that can make this industry grow and make more consumers want to make choices that support all of our mutual climate goals. Lucid is a California-based manufacturer. We make all of our vehicles in Arizona, and we are growing rapidly. As Stacie mentioned, we were able to achieve 520 miles of charge, EPA rated, on our Lucid Air sedan, as well as being the fastest charging EV on the road globally. We get about 300 miles of charge in 20 minutes on a 350 kilowatt charge. So I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. So we are very excited to see the Biden administration's commitment to EVs and to infrastructure. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. Matthew.
Hello, all. I'm Matt Nelson. I'm Director of Government Affairs at Electrify America. Electrify America is might be new to y'all because we are kind of the new kid on the block in the charging business. We opened our first station in 2018, but we've been opening what we refer to as ultra fast DC fast chargers and charging stations at a pace of 4 station sites per week for the last 4 years. And as a result, we are now the largest network of public charging stations in the United States. We feature the same technology that Jess just highlighted that the Lucid Air can use is what we deploy. It's a 350 kilowatt capable charging station. For those of you who are not electrical engineers, which is probably everyone on this call, including myself, 350 kilowatts equates to 20 miles of range per minute of charging. And so that's a lot of juice in a very short time, and it approaches the gas station experience. At the end of the day, that's what our company is all about, is creating the kind of charging station experience that people are used to through their gasoline powered car. So charging is not a barrier to EV adoption for the American public.
Very good, very good. You know, let's kind of stick with that grid issue. One of the companies that I represent, it's Aptera out of California, another startup, and they've decided to incorporate solar with their EV capabilities because there's such a concern about the burden to the grid. So can you speak a little bit about that, Matthew? What people should know about their concerns about overburdening the grid, particularly in rural areas?
Certainly. So this is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about, because there's a lot of misconception about the role of charging and the power grid. The simple math here is that to electrify the entire vehicle fleet over a reasonable period of time, the kind of schedule that California and the Biden administration have endorsed, is going to increase demand on the grid by about 1% per year.
Oh, wow.
It currently increases by between 1 and 2% per year, and that's much slower than it used to be. And because of efficiency and the changing in our industrial base, the fact of the matter is we used to grow our grid at 2 to 3 to 4% per year. So in order to electrify the entire United States light duty and heavy duty transportation fleet, it can be done without a significant change in the amount of growth in the grid generally. The second, so that's the macro picture. On the micro picture, the question is always asked, well, your charging stations are these 350 kilowatt chargers. That's a single charger delivering enough power to power 350 homes. That must be really straining on the grid in that location. And the truth of the matter is, it is if it's poorly sited. But our approach is to do feasibility studies of all of our charging station sites with the utility before we select our sites. And as a result, we have found that we've built more than 700 of these stations across the country. And in less than 5 cases have we actually faced a serious utility interconnection cost or difficulty issue. The other 695 times, we've been able to do it working with the utility without creating any burdens there. In addition to that, to your point, we power our stations with renewable energy in multiple different ways. First of all, we buy it directly from the grid. We buy renewable energy from the grid. Second, we put solar canopies above our stations to supplement our station energy use, so that the solar canopies are not big enough to power our entire stations. They'd have to be the size of 6 or 7 football fields to do that. But they are enough to supplement the power of the station. And then finally, we deploy batteries. And we deploy batteries at our stations primarily to address demand charges, which is a topic of not necessary to get into. But the benefit of those is that our stations can be reactive to grid needs. So the deployment of charging stations, it's really important to understand. Not only is the growth not going to overwhelm the grid because it's only 1% per year increase, but the stations are coming on board onto the grid are assets to the grid. They are reactive load. So if there is if the utility has an upcoming fear that they are going to have a blackout, they can draw on our batteries, they can draw on our stations, they can draw on even in-home charging stations, and they can reduce the risk of a blackout. It's an incredibly important thing to understand, is that blackouts are caused by an imbalance in load, and you can't turn off the load to the hospital, or you can't turn it off to a skyrise. I'm on the 16th floor of my condo right now. They can't turn off the power here, or I can't get down. But you can leverage the grid resources that are flexible, and charging stations are flexible load. So bottom line, it's not a massive increase in the load. It is a flexible load, and it will reduce grid burdens over time.
Wow, very good, very good. Omar, you were agreeing. Did you want to interject anything?
No, absolutely. And thanks for the opportunity. By the way, I see in the chat, Chris Sharrock there has a great eye for car design. So thank you for the comments.
Those are some beautiful cars behind you, sir.
And Jess as well.
Absolutely, stunning.
Two important points. I think the load shifting that Matthew pointed out is really important, because that also helps managing, avoiding brownouts and blackouts. But it can also help sort of move pricing around, particularly when it comes to industrial users, energy intensive industrial users. So there's a lot in the energy and utility space, I think, that can be impacted. And so I agree with all of Matthew's points. I think I would also add that most EV users will be charging overnight when the car is parked and not being used, and they're at home sleeping or resting. And so it's important to also note that at the time of day, when there's very little demand on the grid, pulling off the grid from consumers, because we're now all resting and sleeping for the day, you're going to have a significant amount of capacity being produced, because power generation never stops. You can't shut it off at night and turn it on again in the morning, just like we would do the switches in our home. And so this is also incredibly beneficial from an economic perspective, and power generators, as you would see probably large trends of drivers recharging overnight.
Yeah, if I could just add there too, that, I think when you're talking about EVs, especially with really advanced battery technology, they should really be seen as rolling assets to the grid, to your home, to offset these demands on the grid at any time. Many vehicles now are equipped to be bi-directional charging. So they could charge your home in an electricity crisis like we saw in Texas. They could charge the home for many, many, many days. They're really phenomenal technology here that can be, when there are enough of them on the road or being plugged into, say, an office building all at the same time, they could work to lower the electricity costs of that building during those peak times. And then when the energy cost comes down at certain points in the day or in the early evening, then it starts fueling the cars back up again. So the energy can go both ways there. And it can be a huge asset that I think in time, especially in Europe, and as we all get a little bit more concerned with electricity costs growing over the next several years and decades, that this should be seen as an asset for one's own personal use, but also for the community.
I love that point. I find bidirectional charging such an interesting and exciting concept. And for those of you who aren't EV wonky people like ourselves, as Jessica mentioned, it's the ability to take your car, your EV, and plug it in and have your house be able to run beautifully and have a source of power, almost like a generator. And it's nice to know that the industry is thinking about this in such a way that your vehicle is more than just the way you get around. From what I understand with bidirectional charging, the holdup, if any, is that we haven't done what we need to do on the grid side to be able to receive that energy yet. Do any of you want to speak to that, Matt? Anybody?
I don't want to speak out of turn here, but the one thing I would say is that it's important that we harmonize some of the standards to make sure that when we're talking about bidirectional charging, that the technology that companies like GM and Lucid and others are putting in place is technology that is appropriate for all regions of the world. So I think that's really the key aspect there that we and others are probably working on in the next couple of years.
Love it.
I'd add to that, just as GM is partnering with 9 different charging networks, I mean, the charging capabilities are going to grow very quickly with Matthew's organization or entity and the many others are involved here. And Jess's point about harmonization, I think, is a very good one. It's really important to take a couple steps back, make sure that codes are being updated, and that as we are working on regulations, that these regulations take in mind the need to have this bidirectionality, as well as ensuring that we have the new buildings, new development are inclusive of this EV transformation. That will continue to help drive the private and public sector capital and the partnerships that are going to make the transition to EVs a real possibility.
That tees up the next
Omar,
question.
I'm glad that you brought up the buildings aspect here. This is something that for those, there may be policymakers participating or watching on Facebook who are working in Europe or with European policymakers. And this is something that's a particular challenge there, I think, because if you look at European cities, sometimes these buildings are not replaced for hundreds of years, or they're replaced in a way, even if they were updated recently, that aren't necessarily conducive to allowing for lots of charging in the in the parking garage or in the home. And that's something that I know that policymakers there are taking a look at this year in particular. And I hope that there can be agreement between some of the more forward-thinking countries and maybe some of the Eastern European countries that may not have the funds to be able to update the infrastructure as needed, because I think we're a little bit lucky in the US that there's so much change. The face of the New York skyline looks so different from every 2-year period. There's so much change going on, and we really need to be looking at this holistically, not only from the vehicle and vehicle charging along roadway corridors, but how do we look at our society and the way we build cities and the way we build in rural areas to accommodate this change.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point.
The only thing I would
follow. Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to add that what you started the question on was what's often called vehicle to grid or V to G,
Mm-hmm.
and it's definitely the future. But there's this interim period that's really important. The vehicle to grid, and for instance, it's really exciting that the EVs coming to market can now power your home when there's a blackout, so you don't have to buy a generator. To your point, that is completely the future. But right now, that is the future. It is not the current. It is not. There are not a lot of EVs that are doing that even to home, and it's definitely not the current capability of EVs that they can put power into the grid to meet grid needs today. In contrast, the charging infrastructure in market today is already serving as a grid asset. It's already participating in wholesale markets. It's already making the grid more secure and more reliable and more resilient to incident. And so we are in this middle period, and sometimes these conversations fly over what's often referred to as V1G, or the responsiveness of the charging infrastructure to grid needs. But for the next 5 or 10 years, this is the asset that we've got, and it is hugely valuable. And the more of it that gets deployed, the more resilient the grid will be. And in the long term, hopefully the vehicles will play a bigger role in resiliency as well.
Very good. Thank you. Omar, you said something about regulations and legislation. For all of you, is there any particular legislative vehicle or regulation that you're watching closely and you want more support for, given that you're leaders in the EV industry? Omar, I'll let you go first.
Sure. There are a variety of initiatives here in the U.S., federally, both in Capitol Hill. I'll talk about that in a minute. And proposals at the state level. There are also proposals around the world. Consumer incentives are probably one of the most significant areas of policy development that one can have or a government can adopt in order to advance the electric vehicle transition. We have seen, and there's data that shows that consumer incentives are a really powerful way of accelerating this transition. And you bring that along with the infrastructure, and we're going to be able then to attain the goals that have been laid out for this EV transition to occur and help address some of our public policy challenges like sustainability and climate change, et cetera. So I mentioned in the United States, in U.S. Congress, we've had a number of initiatives already enacted and adopted. That's part of the Infrastructure Act that was passed last fall. And you, Stacie, you referred to that in your opening here with respect to the $5 billion investment and opportunity through state grant programs to help build out an infrastructure across the United States. A lot of states are also investing their dollars with partner or in partnership with communities and the private sector to help also build out that charging infrastructure. So this is really meaningful and important. A corollary to that, right, or the important complement to that is now the bringing the product to the market in a meaningfully fast way to have an impact on the environment, a beneficial impact on the environment. And that's where we get to the Build Back Better proposal, and more specifically, the climate change provisions in there and the EV tax credits, the consumer incentives. And this is for the buyer that walks into the dealership to help them sort of take a look at and really level out the economics between a traditional gas engine vehicle and the electric vehicle itself. And that program is designed to be available for a limited period of time to help sort of phase with that transition or bridge that transition over until EVs scale up, right? And with the economies of scale, then now the cost of the EVs or the economics would improve from a consumer incentive. Consumer incentives work. And so, let's see how that piece of legislation advances through the Congress.
Very good, very good. Jess, did you want to add anything to that? Any particular bills or legislation or regulations that Lucid is watching?
Sure. I agree with pretty much everything that Omar said. Obviously, we're very excited about the infrastructure package from the fall, and we really think that the charging infrastructure is laying the groundwork for the consumer confidence that we're all hoping for to eliminate anxiety about range and charging times and replace that with a confidence and even an excitement that we can save as consumers so much money by not going to the pump and so much time by not having to reroute ourselves by a gas station. So that's exciting. Agree that consumer incentives are fantastic. The current $7,500 tax credit for EV purchase on the books is very helpful. We would support continuing that program. I think that for many companies and also for the industry as a whole, I personally don't think that having MSRP caps is very helpful because we're really trying to get more EVs on the road in every segment. And even at the high-end segments, these are aspirational vehicles that I think do spur additional interest in the entire EV market if we get more of them on the road. So I don't think that the MSRP caps or AGI caps at this point are helpful. Perhaps down the road when we reach a critical mass of EVs on the road here, but I think that's a ways away, and we just don't have enough driving around right now for that to be helpful. In Europe, the AFIR, the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation that they're working on right now is something we're watching closely. I think that a robust program that focuses on EV charging rather than these alt fuels that some are hoping for will help Europe achieve the Fit for 55 goals. And then at the state level, I want to also bring up that we're obviously Lucid, along with some other manufacturers, we are a direct to consumer sales company. We do not use dealerships. So this is a state by state franchise law issue. And we think, and we were supported by a lot of independent research that shows that more EV sales are obviously needed to achieve our climate goals, and more EV sales would happen if there was an allowance for direct to consumer sales. A lot of states like California already allow this. Florida already allows it. And if you look at Florida versus say New York, which doesn't allow it, Florida EV sales are going gangbusters. Despite the fact that many would think maybe that the policymakers there are not as attuned to EV issues or climate issues as New York politicians are. And that's really, I think, due to the fact that a consumer can choose to go buy his EV anywhere and not have to go through a dealer, especially because dealers aren't, let's say, the most loved industry in the country.
Interesting points. I see Omar giggling. We're going to get to you in a second, Omar. So let's flesh out very quickly for our audience. And we say direct to consumers. How does that compare to their usual experience? If we say, I want to go out and buy a car today, let's ignore supply chain demands right now. But let's flesh that out for our audience. What is the difference between direct to consumers versus how we're used to buying cars?
Yeah, direct to consumer would be that you're buying it directly from the manufacturer.
So am I going into a dealership? What am I doing? Do I get to test drive?
To either online or at Lucid, we call them studios, basically a storefront that you can go and get in the car and feel the car. For those in the DC area, for instance, we have one in Tyson's Corner. So you can go and experience the car for yourself. And if you like it, the price is what it is. It is transparent. It's on the website. There's no upcharge. The price is the same for every person, no matter what they look like. So that's another issue that I think some people have with dealerships being mistreated because they're perceived to be not as savvy as a buyer as others. I'll also say, I think we all see in the news, we're in a supply chain challenging situation here globally right now. And the data show that a lot of dealers are marking up the price of used and new cars, some manufacturers more than others. And unfortunately, the manufacturers don't always have a lot of control over the dealers. So the dealer can kind of do what they want. And it's a shame because it's the consumer who misses out on a deal and at a difficult financial and economic time as it is with COVID. So the price transparency is important. And I think that, it's kind of like if I were to tell you want a pair of Levi's jeans, you can't go to Macy's and Walmart and Target to figure out where you want to buy them. You have to go to Walmart, and Walmart can charge whatever they want, and Levi's doesn't even have a say.
Very nice. Omar, rebuttal.
No, it's not a debate, but at General Motors, we absolutely value our dealers. Dealerships are independent businesses. A lot of them are small businesses, and families have invested a great deal of time, energy, sweat, and of course capital into their networks. Dealers are part of their communities, and ours are for sure. It's a place where not only do you buy the vehicle, you can have the vehicle serviced. You can ask questions about the vehicle. I know I grew up in a neighborhood where actually happened to be a General Motors dealer. Used to welcome the community in, help teach bicycle riding safety to children, help ensure that that the community is vibrant and active and investing locally. So that grassroots community presence is really important, and that helps to extend the brand of our products, our vehicles, right down to the family level. And so we do value our dealerships. I think, what Jess is getting at is there are different business models. We have an existing business model in the United States where dealerships exist, and the product goes from the manufacturer to the dealer, and you have these extensive investments in dealer networks. And really what we have here is really a policy debate about, does government get involved in showing preferential treatment to one business model or another? Or does government try to, as best as possible, ensure that there's a level playing field? And it's really important to have a level playing field, particularly in the dealership context, because you sell around the dealerships. That has an economic disadvantage for those families that have invested in dealerships, or those companies like General Motors that sell through those dealers. And Jess is right, it's an active debate at the state level and the state legislatures. And that's where the debate should be. I think, around incentives though, and Build Back Better, there's really a lot of, just to get back to the final point there, the main point of your question is that there's a great deal of policy in there that drives a public-private partnership to help ensure that we're accelerating this EV transition. And we're, at least from the General Motors perspective, making electric vehicles available to all economic levels, right? To all families that are interested in purchasing an EV. I tend to call it democratization of the electric vehicle, right? If we're going to really succeed in achieving our climate policy goals, it's important for all drivers, regardless of income level, to be able to have access to an electric vehicle and be willing to buy in. That's why Build Back Better includes like a used EV tax credit for when we get to that sort of cycle and rotation. And I know there's been a great deal of debate around, say the AGI levels or MSRP. And, we know that in the political process, there's give and take, there's pros and cons. But we're very supportive of the current proposal, and hopefully we're able to get this through the process and be successful.
Omar, appreciate that. Very good. I do know, ACYPL Motors, we're watching Build Back Better and hoping that those tax incentives come through. I like what you said, Jess, about EVs having critical mass in the United States. What does that look like? How do we get there? Omar, I love that you said that GM is committed to offering it, EV vehicles at various levels. I know for ACYPL Motors, our vehicles start at $25,000. And if we are successful in getting that tax credit that's in Build Back Better, that coupled with what states offer, you're able to get a brand new vehicle starting around $15,000, which we think would be amazing. And it speaks to really positioning EV and making it affordable for most homes. So what I will ask you, and Matt, I want you to chime in on this. When people right now think about EVs, oftentimes they think of them as aspirational. And when you look at the numbers of who's buying EVs, it tends to be one particular crowd that we hear about. So I want to know who is buying EVs and what can we do to make sure that we can have critical mass for the American public as we build up our EV industry.
Well, first of all, I had to switch headsets. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sure.
Okay, great. So we are a charging company, so I'm not going to be as knowledgeable about who buys EVs as Jess and Omar. But one of the things that I do think is notable is that EVs are becoming much more of a mainstream vehicle, and specifically long-range battery electric vehicles that have capability to fast charge and be a primary car. So the car that you can use on the weekends to go to grandma's house. That is now becoming a mainstream vehicle. Our marketing campaign on this is named Normal Now. So our point is that EVs are normal now. They do what normal cars do. They don't look funny anymore. They don't look like, a lot of them drive by you and you don't even know they're EVs.
Right.
And they're coming across all segments. So you've got two, of course, the three of you all represent very different segments in the EV industry. What you see is that every segment is moving towards electrification, long range, faster charging, what we refer to as ultra fast charging vehicles. And that's happening among foreign and domestic. It's happening in luxury and volume. It's happening in small cars and SUVs and pickup trucks. It's happening in domestically manufactured and foreign factories. It's across the entire industry. And we see that as an extremely important development. And the net effect of that is, because now the vehicles are available in all segments and they meet a normal family's normal needs, you're seeing a very significant shift in who is the typical EV driver. Okay. And the data can be misleading. The data, a lot of folks will focus on, well, it looks like really only wealthy people buy electric cars. But it's important to realize that the population that buys new cars in general is a pretty wealthy, pretty old, and pretty male population. I think the last numbers I saw said that 57% of new car buyers are male. The average age is still a baby boomer. And the average price of a new car, any type of car in the United States, the end of last year, was $46,000 a vehicle. And so in that context, electric vehicles are very mainstream. It's just that you can't put it in the context of, there's a lot of focus and attention on how do we get electric vehicles in the hands of low-income populations, which is a critically important question. But one of the things that sometimes leads to that, the next step of that, is we need to figure out how to get new electric vehicles into a low-income population, low-income buyers to buy new electric vehicles. And I would just caution that that's a dangerous goal, because it's a little ambitious that to get a population that is not buying new cars. It's a population, low-income folks buy used cars. And so we need to really have a used car strategy for used electric vehicles as much as new cars. So maybe I'm belaboring the point. The point is, car buyers, new car buyers, tend to be pretty old, pretty male, and pretty wealthy. And so the electric vehicle buyers, to the extent they reflect that same trend, it's not really different than the car buying population as a whole.
Very good. Thank you.
New car, totally different story when you get to used car.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, we've talked about various aspects of EVs. And all three of you are positioned differently. What do you think is the greatest barrier or challenge to America building a robust EV industry? So we'll start with Jess.
Thanks. I think, we are a huge country. Number of people, geography, obviously political views, especially now. I think that there are a number of barriers, unfortunately, but I'm optimistic that in the coming years we can overcome most or all of them. I think for us, we talk about going from range anxiety to range confidence, and that is not only something that we hope to achieve and we hope others achieve through a lot of range on the car itself. 520 miles is a really long way to go on just one charge, but also having a robust infrastructure network across the country, not only in people's homes, because not everyone has their own garage where they can hook up an EV charger, even if it is subsidized by state or federal incentives to make that happen. But and not everyone goes to an office either by car or an office that might have charging or a traditional office building kind of scenario. So we need charging for people who live in apartment buildings or live in really rural areas or have different charging needs, road trips to make sure that if I'm going to visit my grandmother in a really rural area, and the best way to get there is not along 95 corridor up through the Northeast, that I can still find charging. So I think that's really important. I think to get us kind of kickstarted, as I mentioned before, those consumer incentives are important. I think a lot of market research has shown that every level of car buyer appreciates an incentive. People are sensitive to price, even people who can afford premium vehicles. So I think that that's a hurdle that hopefully state governments and then the federal government can help get us over a little bit until there's that mass adoption. So I think those are the two big ones. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said more about culture and perception of EVs. And much to my happiness, I am glad that this is really, I think this is being overcome. I personally am really excited about electric pickups and electric work trucks. And these are vehicles that I think there's a lot of excitement in communities that are buying those vehicles, either for work or for pleasure, that they can go electric. I'm excited by the products Rivian's putting out. And so I think that there's vehicles for everyone. They just need to make sure that consumers need to feel confident that they can charge when they need to. And as soon as they get behind that wheel and understand the power and the horsepower and the pickup that those vehicles have, I think I've never heard anyone who had an EV ever say they're going back to an internal combustion engine, ever. I think that our vehicle makes that very easy to do with 1,111 horsepower. But even EVs that don't have that horsepower are still very peppy off the starting block.
Mm-hmm. Omar, would you like to add something to that? What do you think is the greatest barrier for the EV industry in America?
And building on Jess's comments here, which are very good. Look, the U.S. has been a leader in the automotive industry for more than a century. And it's important for us to get our laws and regulations in the right place so that the United States can continue to be competitive and lead. And when I think about what is needed, what are the barriers? Well, let's first take a look at the entire value stream. And by value stream, I mean the sourcing, the materials, the critical minerals that are needed, thinking about education, advanced manufacturing, the technology. I mean, the technology today is great. I mean, Jess's point about the torque, right, the speed, the peppiness of the car is a fantastic point. That's all the born from fantastic technological developments by great R&D teams. We need to continue to invest in STEM education to ensure that we're at the forefront of this technology, that we're winning this global technology race. When I think about value stream, and I mentioned advanced manufacturing, we have to have the workforce to engage in this advanced manufacturing. We think about the transition of the auto worker from ICE vehicles to electric vehicles, and we have to be a part and supporting in that transition. Someone messaged about the union add-on to the EV tax credits, and I think that's an important part of the discussion is working families and where do they sit on this value stream as we embark on this transition. Further down, it's the materials, it's sourcing. We have a lot of those materials in the United States, yes, but what the United States does not have great capacity in, or North America doesn't, is in processing, right? And we know all too well the semiconductor shortage and what that may mean for seat warmers in some vehicles to greater supply chain challenges. And we have to sort of think about it all holistically and ensure that we've got the right policy measures in place so that we are addressing this value stream and we're able to produce and continue to be competitive in the EV market.
Very nice. Matt, did you want to add to that?
I'll just say that to grow electric vehicle, to Jess and Omar's point, electric cars are better than gas cars.
Mm-hmm.
So every study, they are quieter, they are cheaper to operate, they are
Cleaner,
fewer moving parts, they are they don't vibrate, they don't pollute, but that's almost a secondary benefit. For the actual driver experience, they're incredibly fast off the line. They're fun. And so the barrier to EVs is not the vehicles themselves. It's everything else that goes with them. And that's where we come in. We think that charging is the major barrier. And every study of consumers seems to reconfirm this, that charging is either the barrier or one of the top three of a consumer that's holding consumers back. And we think that the solution is actually quite straightforward. We need a national network that is ultra fast, in other words, approaching those gas station speeds, that is reliable. In other words, no one's ever thought to themselves on Saturday morning, I wonder if the Shell station will work this weekend.
right?
We need to get to that level of reliability in charging, and it needs to be non-proprietary. We need to have the same stations charge GM's vehicles and Lucid's vehicles. And luckily, there is now consensus around that. There is a single standard for fast charging called CCS, and everyone now, 31 different brands are all using it. So to us, it's a three-legged stool, very straightforward, ultra fast, 350 kilowatt, non-proprietary, and actually reliable. And if we do that, then the American public can go electric without significant barriers, and they'll be happy doing it because the cars are better.
Thank you. So I love this when we talk about the barriers, particularly with charging. Aptera has decided to incorporate solar panels into their vehicles. So they're able to get 40 miles of driving from the sun. So it's possible, depending on how you use your vehicle, you never have to plug it in. And if you do plug it in, you can plug it into a regular outlet. So it's exciting to see the different advances we're making with research and development. It'd be nice if we can make sure we can get all these things to market, whether it be through direct to consumer sales or in the form of a dealership or a salon or something like that. But at the end of the day, all of these things that Lucid is creating, all these amazing vehicles that Omar's GM is creating, and all the good work that Matthew is doing with installation of the charging stations, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the impact on the environment. So several times you've mentioned climate in this conversation, and we're getting close to the end here. So would you all like to speak to your value proposition with what EVs are doing for the climate, specifically with your cars?
I'm happy to start there a little bit. I think that when it comes to the superior R&D that you're talking about, the R&D advancements in the industry as a whole are very encouraging and very exciting the last few years. Every automaker that I'm aware of is either looking at or announcing really great things. It comes down to, I think, first and foremost, the heart of the car is the powertrain, the battery, the motor. Really making sure that these are as small, light, and efficient as possible. I think for Lucid, the story is really about our efficiency as a whole. I mentioned how fast we can charge, and I mentioned how far we can go. But for us, we see that not all EVs are created equal. Some are, electricity guzzlers, the same way you could have a gas guzzler in an internal combustion engine car. So for us, it's about how much electricity are you taking into the battery to go how many miles. And we're really pleased that our engineering team was able to achieve about 4.6 miles per kilowatt hour of energy. which is really almost double the next closest vehicle, especially considering this is a luxury sedan. It is not a light car. It's a big, luxurious vehicle that is getting more miles on every single kilowatt hour than anyone else. And so what that translates to is more money in your pocket, but also less pull from the grid, less pull from the Earth's resources to go farther. And I think that will be a key metric as people become more familiar with EVs over time. That will be a key metric that people will pay attention to, the way that they paid attention to, oh, does this car get 30 miles a gallon or 12?
Excellent points. And I think too, I'm looking forward to the day when the public just kind of has a beautiful menu of the EV options and understands the differences, right? Because you just made some excellent points, Jess. Our car with that Terra Motors, it gets 1,000 miles on a charge, but it's not this big, heavy luxury sedan, right? It's a two-seater. It's smaller. It's made from a different material, but it does different things. And I really feel like there is an EV for just about everyone out there, depending on what you're looking for, right? Omar, did you want to add to what?
I was going to say, Stacie, you kind of borrowed our slogan. It's everybody in at GM, and there's an EV for everyone.
Yeah.
It's something we believe passionately about, and not just the ones on the back screen here. You're right. What we aspire to do is it's for the suburban family shuttling their kids from school to practices to their events and activities. You need something like the Chevy Traverse to be able to get around it, and so we're looking at that customer in the EV segment. We're looking at the customers who are interested in the luxury vehicle, luxury sedan, like a Cadillac, pickup trucks, and larger SUVs. There's a different type of need for mobility depending on who you are and what you do and what you and your family do. And so we aspire to meet that need, and we'll do so over the next couple of years.
Very good. Matthew, did you want to add anything to that, sir?
Sure. Well, first of all, Omar didn't mention that his vehicles are also for Tony Soprano's kids, which I think is a notable.
It was a good commercial.
Great spot.
It was a great commercial.
All I'll mention is that all of we power our stations with renewable energy. So not only are our EVs, of course, much more efficient in their use of energy, but the energy that they use, it can easily be procured from 100% renewable sources. And so you can go to a zero emission, you can reach zero emission. People call electric vehicles zero emission vehicles for a reason. With procurement of a renewable energy off the grid, which is readily available, it can be a truly zero emission vehicle. And that has benefits for the climate. It also has benefits to on other air pollutants, including hazardous air pollution. We've made a lot of progress in this country on smog and particulate pollution, but there's still a lot further to go. And that's a kitchen table health issue. That's your kids can play soccer on the weekends and not have asthma attacks, sort of thing. And so it's a very important area to focus on, and one that we are proud to power our stations with renewables in order to make sure that there aren't any emissions associated with our stations. And we're working on expanding that. We'll have some announcements on that in the coming year that are even more robust.
Thank you. Well, we could go another hour and talk about batteries, but we're actually coming to the end of our time together. Do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to add that we maybe didn't touch in our little time together?
I'd just like to say, Stacie, thank you so much again for hosting this and for moderating the session. And I want to reiterate that, of course, we do want to be very successful as a company and to see Lucids in as many garages across the world as we can. But for me, it's also important, and for Lucid as a whole, to see the success of this industry as a holistic vision for the world. And by industry, I don't mean only manufacturers. I mean salespeople, the entire value chain, as Omar said, that we're looking to do everything in a sustainable way that we can all be proud of, the charging infrastructure, and what this does also to the hard infrastructure around the country. We cannot be successful as a manufacturer without seeing the success of the whole industry, because a rising tide, as they say, lifts all boats. And so that's something that I think we're all on the same page about. And a little friendly competition is great, but overall, I think we work better together to make this happen. And the more people out there who are touching our industry and helping the cause, the better. So thank you very much to everyone who has joined today.
Indeed, indeed. Omar, did you want to say something real
I was just
quickly?
going to say thank you, Stacie. Thank you, Matthew and Jessica, for this conversation. ACYPL for organizing it, and we could take this group on the road. I had a lot of fun here, and we can certainly keep this conversation going. So thanks again.
Absolutely, Matt.
Well, of course, thank you to including us as a charging company in the dialogue. But most importantly, for those of you listening in, go try these cars that these three sell. Stacie didn't put her car in a picture of her car in the background, but the Aptera is one of the cooler looking cars I've ever seen. The Lucid is one of a kind. The Air is setting all sorts of records on charging speed and driver experience, and if it's in your price range, man, go for it. And then if it's not in your price range, Chevy and GM have a whole host of products this is a really exciting moment to test drive an electric car. And so if you haven't done it, I really encourage you to do so. Whether it's at a dealer or a showroom, I'll let you decide. But thanks for including us, and have a lovely afternoon.
Well, it was my pleasure. And for our audience, thank you for tuning in. And I'd like to ask a small favor before you sign off. It is crucial to measure the impact of this session like this for ACYPL partners, including the U.S. Department of State. To do this, we ask that you complete the brief survey that we have. It's an exit survey. Zoom viewers will see the survey link on the screen immediately following the session, and will also receive an email tomorrow. The viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube can find the survey link in the video description. Thank you in advance. Thank you, everyone, and have a tremendous day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.